And hello everyone, it is Peter Sam the Narrow Gauge Engine here, and welcome to a new series on the channel known as Thomas Defended. It's a series where I defend some of Thomas & Friends' most notoriously disliked or undervalued episodes across the classic, hit, and Brenner eras of the show, because as always, the other two and the reboot can go burn in the fiery pits. Every episode we'll be looking at 3 episodes from these eras and just talk about why I believe they're not quite as bad as one may make it out to be. Some of them still probably are, and it's just me, but sharing different perspectives is always healthy for keeping an open mind. In this episode we'll be looking at 3 episodes across all 3 eras. Not every episode will be like that, but I figured that we should start with equal representation of all 3. We'll firstly delve into the episode from season 1 that is believed to be overshadowed by another in that same season before moving to season 12 to discuss one of the most hated episodes of all time and why it really doesn't deserve it when you look overall. And then we'll finish the episode with one of my personal favourite Brenner era episodes to discuss and why it deserves to be more talked about than it already is. Alright, let's begin where we usually do, at the beginning. Now, I've recently spoken on this topic of this episode with the wonderful Ginger Engine as part of my Season 1 viewer ranking video, so if you want a more casual version of what I'm about to say, go watch that and also go subscribe to him, because Ginger Engine's great. I'm going to keep this fairly brief too, as brief as I can, because I don't want to bore you guys watching, but I also don't want to miss out anything, so we'll see how long this goes on for. Thomas and the Trucks is a strong part in Thomas's first ever saga, in which he discovers what pulling trucks is really like, and for the audience, it's kind of that way too. Yes, we've seen engines having problems pulling trucks before this, i.e. Edward and Gordon, but that wasn't really the truck's fault, more so Gordon being lazy. The guy was only pulling a few and making a big song and dance about it. It was definitely mere overreaction, and not a lot more. In this episode we see what it's really like to have problems with the trucks as they push Thomas down Gordon's hill, which leads to him becoming a runaway but managing to stop at Maron. I think the runaway itself is still fairly strong with good model work, as the speed of the model of Thomas is quite thrilling to see on screen, and even more so when paired with his shocked resin face. Then at the end of the episode we get this knock to his confidence when Sir Topham Hatt berates him for his lack of command over the rolling stock. Now let's address the elephant, or shall I say the tar wagons, in the room. Yes, Dirty Objects, another season 1 episode which also features a runaway on Gordon's hill, does this runaway sequence better in my opinion, but I think the implications of these events in this episode and what it means for the future of the characters is far different and almost shapes them into 2 entirely opposite beasts. In Dirty Objects, James's runaway is a result of him thinking too much about Toby, not because he's that way inclined, but because he just doesn't like him and he thinks he's a dirty object apparently. Nothing like good old-fashioned prejudice, eh? This is the first story that really sets James up as this very backwards-thinking antagonist that is horrible to anyone even slightly different, which is later boosted by his egotistical qualities. Basically, this is the story that I believe started to turn James into a true prick and was the precursor for his spiral into a descent of hate, vanity, and snobbish qualities which make me not like him very much. By contrast, the runaway in Thomas and the Truck seems to be a precursor for his big comeback moment in which he saves a runaway James, ironically enough, in Thomas and the Breakdown Train, in which he shows everyone that he can handle trucks and proves his worth to the others, namely Sir Topham Hatt, who rewards him with a branch line of his own. Now, let me just switch it up for a second and liken this to my other massive passion hyperfixation for 2 seconds. Hell's Kitchen, namely the winner of season 12, Scott Cummings. Scott, like Thomas, had a very rocky beginning and had many issues which led him to be put up for nomination 7 times and questioned in the eyes of his superior. However, he bounced back from this. He proved himself to have qualities that his superior was looking for and therefore won the competition, which to be fair was also helped in part by the fact that others around him fell short and had bigger flaws. Let's be real for a second. Sir Topham Hatt didn't just go, oh, I have this spare branch line that you can have as a reward. Sir Topham Hatt was looking for the best engine to run a branch line that no one was working on. And after James had a major spill and Thomas proved himself as authoritative in the rescue operation and passionate to go beyond the work he was already doing, I think it'd be obvious to anyone that he was the right engine for the job. He just framed it as a reward because, hey, he just did a good job. This brings me back to Thomas and the Trucks. I know I got way off topic, but it all helps. This episode sets up that big Scott Cummings comeback moment by showing Thomas's weakness that he needs to improve, and is an integral part of the biggest storyline of the entire franchise. I mean, this is Thomas the Tank Engine, a staple of British children's TV alongside that Welsh fireman, that woman with a dog and a plane who flies places to tell us how crisps are made or some shit, and those friends that live in a Scottish seaside town telling us about which coloured house they're going to. His first ever arc is of course going to be the most prominent. In short, Thomas and the Trucks is such a pivotal episode within a decent runaway and such major implications in terms of character that it deserves more love and not just to be labelled as that one episode with the runaway that's not as good as the runaway from that other episode. Now let's venture into what is probably going to be a losing battle, but I must at least try because I don't know if it necessarily deserves the label as the worst of season 12. The crux of my argument for this episode is, would you rather feel something bad or feel nothing whilst watching a Thomas and Friends episode? If your answer is you'd rather feel something bad, congratulations, I may be able to convince you as to why Push Me Pull You is actually better than most of season 12, a considerable portion at least. Just to clarify before I delve in further, I am not saying by any means that this is a good episode. What I'm arguing is that others are worse episodes because this episode simply gives us more. Let's start by analysing what Push Me Pull You gives us. We have bad characterizations of Skarloey and Rheneas, followed by a runaway that stops and starts for some reason, and a bevy of crashes with the last one being into a pond. If we had character changes and a fixed runaway sequence, I guarantee you this episode wouldn't have been so poorly received by fans. Swap out Skarloey for Sir Handel and Rheneas for Peter Sam, and boom, it suddenly works much better than before. We see a similar issue of this in episodes like Heave Ho Thomas, The Party Surprise, where the episodes don't really feel like the specific characters we are watching on screen make the narrative. Any old characters could swap them out. For instance, if Heave Ho Thomas featured Percy in place of Thomas, and Henry in place of Hank, would it really feel that different? Same thing with The Party Surprise, swap Freddie and Colin for Salty and Cranky, and I'd argue it actually becomes an infinitely better episode. So why are these episodes worse than Push Me Pull You? Well, because this makes the new characters introduced, Hank and Colin, feel like just unnecessary add-ons. I will say Tram Trouble, the episode that introduces Flora, does make her feel more necessary to the plot by way of having her be the only other Tram on Sodor, aside from Toby, but its weakness is that it's severely boring and uninteresting, something that Push Me Pull You has no issue with. Due to its infamy alone, the one thing you can't argue it is that it's boring. What about other episodes in this season? Well, episodes like Mountain Marvel, Toby's Special Surprise, and The Man in the Hills are ones that I'd argue are definitely weaker due to the fact that they pretend to have lore. Mountain Marvel features a statue of Proteus but doesn't provide other details to strengthen the goal that I'm assuming the writers were aiming for, which is that Proteus is this fabled, amazing engine who used to work on the Skarloey or the Mid-Sodor Railway, and we don't know what happened to him. No connections between him and the engine from Duncan Gets Spooked are ever made either, so I'm not really counting that as an answer. To me, it's surface level nothingness. Now you might argue that the Magic Lamp from season 9, an episode I highly praised previously, does this too, but that episode handled the idea much better in my opinion, because there's no stupid statue that doesn't mean anything, and it also had other things going for it. This statue Peter Sam finds, to me, is just emblematic of the writers wanting to feel like they have lore in a place they don't, and just went, fuck it, let's make it up as we go, instead of sitting down and actually going through it. Well, what about the other two then? I won't bore you with Man in the Hills again, as I've already spoken about the bollocks of its supposed lore in my top 10 worst hit era episodes video. Toby's Special Surprise though, this features a sign for an old railway called Sodor Tramways, which has Toby on the front. If you really think about this one, you realise it means nothing, and it gives us no real insight into anything. Considering this has Toby on the front, and you can tell from the number 7 embedded into the side of a tram that looks exactly like him, has his particular facial features, this is just his old railway sign. This tells us nothing, and probably does nothing but give the poor guy flashbacks. All of this fake lore these episodes try to pass off is kind of insulting to the roots of the show in the first place, because they didn't even bother to try from where I'm looking. I think that this blatant disregard is worse than anything Push Me Pull You does, because sure, it's a butchering of the characters, but this butchering has been done before, and isn't the root cause of this change. We should be looking to put more blame on the episodes that began the trend, like Skarloey the Brave, not episodes that kept consistent with the change afterwards. If anything, that's almost a source of praise. Even if it is bad, at least this one's consistent. A far cry from these fake lore episodes. I'm not here to say Push Me Pull You is a good episode, it's not. But the worst of the season, and even of all time, that's over the top for me. And there are other episodes, even after those that I've just listed, that still pale in comparison, like Henry Gets It Wrong, which, like with this episode, does follow the trend of Henry being an eco-warrior and an idiot, but pushes it to an all-time extreme and lacks any common sense. Something that Henry, even in a season like 8 with Henry and the Wishing Tree, did still have in my opinion. Thomas puts the brakes on. The addition of this random bridge that needs super special bricks to make is weird, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that Misty Island Rescue did this idea better. After all, it is most prominent in the strongest part of the film, the first 10 minutes. Season 12 is a joke of a season, and anyone that thinks it's the worst will see no argument from me, but I don't see why this episode is hated to the extent it is, because there is so much worse out there from this season. I think it's time to strip the worst label off this episode and attach it to an episode more worthy, more earth-shattering, more painful to sit through, literally just any season 15 episode ever. Now that I'm done here, there's only one place left to go. Let's put on our snowplows and trek all the way to the Steamworks for our last chapter of the video. Season 19 as a whole is a very disregarded season, with its bad episodes generally being acknowledged more than its good. And one of the best episodes from this season, and one that I have a lot of appreciation for, is No Place Like Home. The relationship between Victor and Kevin is explored a lot here, with Victor taking this more wise yet stern fatherly role, and Kevin being this more naive childlike character. When Kevin goes missing by way of getting covered in snow just outside of the Steamworks, Victor immediately goes to save him despite his hatred of snow because of his care for the little crane, which gives him some personality to an otherwise disregarded engine in the show up until this point. He's had his standout moments here and there, but nothing really that delves into his current character. A brilliant backstory and some basic traits is all we have here, but we learn that Victor hates snow here, and is extremely loyal and caring underneath his more stern exterior. Another aspect of this episode that does well is the B-plot with Emily needing her piston rods fitted, but they're stuck out in the snow. Emily was somewhat neglected by the show at this point, only really getting one episode a season and that's it. But she has a presence here and it's quite refreshing. Personally, if I had my way, Emily would have swapped roles with Thomas in this one, as Thomas is everywhere in season 19. He is shoved down our throats so much. Do you want to know how many episodes Thomas has a speaking role of in this season? All of them. Every single one. That is season 9 levels of Thomas, and that was when the show is far more generalised and caged in terms of this shit blows my mind. There are so many characters that got neglected throughout the entirety of the Brenner era. Stafford, Stanley, Scruff, a lot of S names. Arian Burt, Diesel 10, Winston, most of the narrow gauge engines. You're telling me not one of them could have filled this very basic and very standard role that Thomas plays in these episodes. In a perfect world, Emily would be in Thomas's place, but that is my only criticism of the episode, as, in terms of what it means for Victor and Kevin's dynamic, it adds so much weight to it, and it makes a dynamic I'm far more invested in. Beforehand, it was a cheap comic duo, but it turned into something beautiful like much of season 19. This section of the video is far shorter because I simply think that the narrative is really strong, and whilst the other elements of the episode are good, they don't hold a candle to it. The snow effects are strong, but aren't something specific to this episode. The ending is charming enough too, so it's not just this one element, but this one element is the selling point, and a pretty good one. Victor, Kevin, and the Steamworks in general was one of the best things that the Miller era had to offer, and Brenner took that and ran with it, creating genuine feeling characters who are enjoyable to watch and you want to root for. I never see No Place Like Home really ever get brought up outside of season ranking videos, so I'm doing it today because I think it deserves it, and is a great Brenner era episode that leaves you feeling all of those wholesome emotions. So we've reached the end of this episode of Thomas Defended. If you want to see more of this, please feel free to vote for episode 2 in the next community poll that features it as an option. I have many episodes left to talk about, and if you have episodes that you think deserve to be featured, leave them down below, and I'll definitely check them out. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I've been Peter Sam, you've been you, and oh look! A group of angry villagers has gathered outside of my shed with pitchforks and torches, chanting for me to take back everything I said about push me, pull you. I stand by what I say, angry villagers. You'll never get me. Joke's on you. I've had lessons from Merlin. Invisibility on...